up? I am really excited about today's Sunday school lesson. We're kicking it back to the Old Testament, and I love doing that. One of my favorite parts of the Bible is the Old Testament. And I know a lot of people that seems kind of weird because today we like to hang out in the Gospels and the New Testament letters, that kind of thing. But the Old Testament provides a lot of the background and a lot of the index of the entire Bible. So I enjoyed that when I was in school. I enjoy history, and so maybe you're like me and you like history. I don't know. I don't like math, and some people like that, so I don't try to understand. But anyway, I enjoy the book of the Old Testament books and the book of Daniel. Daniel is an incredible character in the Bible. He was able to stand up against a king, and God used him in an incredible way. And today we're going to talk about how him and his friends took a stand against their culture when everybody else was doing something totally different. Does that sound familiar? Don't we talk about that a lot? We talk about being countercultural and not looking like the world per se. But Daniel lived it with his life, and he did it in an environment where it was really, really, really hard to do so. So let's dive into this study. I hope you enjoy these next couple weeks as we talk about the book of Daniel. Now, you've probably heard youth pastors or pastors talk about how following God's will for their life is going to lead to its own set of challenges. And that is certainly true. But let me ask you, what do you think of when I say the word challenge? What does that mean to you? Maybe it sounds like something that's difficult, or something that's hard, or something that's confrontational. A lot of times people think that challenges and issues like that only happen when you make a poor decision. When you make a bad decision, then you face challenges as a result of that bad decision. But that's not always true. There's a lot of Christians that think that God is just going to pave the way for them, and that their life's going to be easy because God's done all the difficult things. And that's just not true. Christians definitely face challenges. Let's read Daniel 1 through 7. During the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylonia and placed them in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning and are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. Daniel, Hananiah, and Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen from all the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. Wow, what a crazy turn of events in Daniel's life. In this first part of this book, his country's been taken over by foreign invaders, by King Nebuchadnezzar, and he's been taken to a foreign land. All this time, he was about 15 years old when all this went down. So this is a crazy turn of events in his life. And you might say, God, the Israelites are God's chosen people. Daniel is one of God's chosen people. Why in the world would a God who is taking care of them, who loves them, want something like this to happen? Well, this is all part of God's plan, because this gave Daniel the opportunity to have great influence over Nebuchadnezzar, but not just one king, over a whole empire, to glorify God. And he's definitely, as we'll continue on, we're going to learn more about him, he's definitely going to get that opportunity. So why would God allow such a thing to happen? God sees things on a much larger scale than we tend to see things. By allowing Daniel and his friends to be taken captive, he provided an opportunity for them to glorify God, and 2, he set Daniel on a course to have great influence over the people of Babylon. So as Christians, you and I are going to face some difficulties. We're going to have our own set of trials. Things are going to get tough from time to time. like I said before, it's not a free pass. God doesn't issue every new Christian a free pass to an easy life. Now, certainly we have joy, we have all the fruits of the Holy Spirit that's available to us, but we're going to face some issues. We're going to go through loss. And, I wrote down some things like sickness is a tough thing. Sometimes that comes out of left field, and it's a difficult thing to go through. Maybe parents are arguing, or maybe even getting a divorce. Job loss is another thing that would throw our families into disarray. Persecution for your faith, or maybe a loved one passes away. Those are some things that we're going to have to face in life, because life is difficult. So those are challenges that as Christians, we're gonna face those from time to time. Okay, so now here's where things are about to get interesting. Verse 8 says, "But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods." So why in the world would Daniel make such a bizarre request? Well, it seems bizarre to us, but what Daniel was doing is he was standing up for his faith. See, to eat these kind of foods and to partake in this kind of stuff, it would have gone against his Hebrew faith and his faith in God. To do so would have been deliberately against God's law. Now, you and I might think, man, we get to do all this stuff and hang out with the king. Well, Daniel lived under a different set of rules. I mean, he lived under the old covenant. And so to eat the certain foods that he was going to be eating, that would have been an abandonment of what God had called him to do. So this is the first instance in this book where Daniel stands up for his faith and says, no, God gave me this command and I'm going to follow my God. Now let's see what happens next. In verse 9 it says, "Now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. But he responded, 'I'm afraid, my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I'm afraid the king will have me beheaded.' Daniel spoke with the attendant, who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. 'Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water,' Daniel said. 'At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see.' The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of the food and wine provided for the others." So the consequences could have been grave for Daniel and his friends had they, even the guard who was put in charge of them was afraid for his own life. That if he let Daniel have his diet, and they looked pale, they looked thin, that Nebuchadnezzar was going to be unhappy, and he was going to probably have him beheaded along with the 4 that were, looking pale and scrawny. And so this was a big risk for Daniel, but Daniel had faith in God. God had given him those commandments for a reason, and he knew that a command given to him from God, that God's not going to turn his back on him. And so let's read on and let's finish out what happens in this first chapter. It says that God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings and visions and dreams. When the training period ordered by the king was completed, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. Whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Wow. So all this happened. And now Daniel and his friends have an opportunity to have great influence over one of the greatest superpowers in the world at that time. Do you think God's plan was by accident, or do you think it was on purpose what happened? So, like I said, I'm excited to continue this study. This is just the first chapter. This is about to get really, really interesting. So, hey, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you'll catch us next week when we continue on in chapter 2. Have a great week. See you next Sunday.